Welcome everyone to the Tulsa.net user group. Tonight, Ryan McGee is a kind of a co-worker's consultant with my employer, Architect Now. And so I got to meet Ryan through working on some projects together, and fantastic guy, extremely knowledgeable, and love talking about Kubernetes and such with him, and DevOps and et cetera. So we were talking about speaking at this user group tonight, and he's talking about the API call coming from inside the house. It's like that is a win right there. I'm super excited for this. So Ryan, if you would go ahead and take over the introductions and the talk, and take it from here. Thank you, Ryan.
Just have to find the unmute button. Thanks, and thanks for having me out. And I appreciate everybody that's got their cameras on. Makes a world of difference. I think this is cool talking, and but you know, you keep saying that's kind of got a horror theme or anything. I don't know about that, man. I thought I'd just talk about a job I used to have. You know, got hired. I don't know. It was maybe 1974, so I'm 75, I think. Little hotel out in Colorado. It's a really neat little hotel. Got a lot of history to it, and they just got a new caretaker in there. And they hired me in to come in, take care of all the IT systems, and they had, you know, their computers and stuff, and they had this hotel management system too. And so, you know, it was wintertime. It was pretty quiet out there, not a lot going on. But then, you know, I'm there sleeping, middle of the night. All of a sudden, this new caretaker wakes me up. Ryan, wake up! Somebody's messing with the system. Oh man, we'll wait for morning. 1 o'clock. He drags me out of bed, looking around, and somebody's messing with the boiler control settings. Now, boiler controls, I don't like messing with boiler controls. Those things are dangerous, right? You let those get too hot, and all of a sudden, boom, the whole building goes up. All sorts of buildings gone up. Like, okay, it's 1 o'clock, but probably don't want to push this off till morning. So, all right. Not familiar with the system. It's like any other job, you know, you come in that first day and trying to figure out what's where and what systems run where and how it's all going. But at least they got me permissions to Azure. You know, I have full permission to Azure. So, you know, hoping that something simple. I jump over to Azure and take a look. And first place I go is App Insights, right? Let's see. So pop into App Insights. Let me scroll this up. And looking through the logs. Oh shoot, yeah. Someone is in there messing with the boiler cutoff. Who else? Let's see. Boiler cutoff. Let's see if there's some details. But you know, I was digging into it and absolutely no details on this thing. I mean, user ID didn't resolve anything. I got all zeros. You know, best I could figure out was it's come down Missouri, and you know, that's just trouble. You got somebody messing with your system from Missouri. We're all in Colorado. So, all right. So that wasn't really getting me anywhere. Let's take a look at the application. That is not where I wanted that window. All right. So taking a look at the application, it's, you know, it's a nice .NET Core application. Looks pretty clean. It's got some Razor pages on it. You know, housekeeping, maintenance, all that stuff. And actually, I can share the front end, what this thing looked like. So it just kind of looked like this. Nothing major. It's like, okay, yeah, I can tackle this. We can get in here and get going. But then I started clicking around. I was like, wait a minute, I kind of missed something. I was able to click around on this application. Never got challenged. I'm right here. Public internet, hotel management. You can probably get there from where you were at. Never got challenged. Huh. Well, maybe something's broken.
Oh shit. It's dinner time, isn't it?
Oh, I can't hear you there, Gary.
Sorry.
Okay. Yep. All right. So I was looking around and looking at all the normal places. So look at the boiler, the maintenance page. Not much there. Didn't see anything relating to authentication. Look up program. Yeah. So at this point, I'm like, okay, I give up. Whoever was in here first, they just skipped it. They planned on it being run internally. And who hasn't came across a system where it was just border security, everything runs internally. Don't worry about authentication or authorization. Just get it out there. All right. So 1 o'clock in the morning, I want to get back to bed. What's the easiest way to get this fixed so I can get back to sleep? Well, there's a little thing called easy off. I mean, it's right there in the name. It's easy. I like easy. So when I come up to, let me show you what that looks like. Maybe we can walk through that a little bit. This is kind of the first step in trying to get something secure, getting at least some sort of security around this. And the nice thing about easy auth is you don't have to change the code. Nothing has to change. Just come down to your portal, to your web app, and add an identity provider. I mean, click and go, right? Microsoft identity provider is a nice one because if your customer, if your users, if they have, Office 365 or Enterprise or pretty much any Microsoft product, they have a Microsoft tenant. So this Microsoft identity provider lets them use that same username password that they have with that tenant. A lot of same username password they use for their email. A lot of times, if customers have like a on-premise Active Directory, they'll sync that up using Microsoft AD Sync. So that's really nice. It looks like a lot of this is kind of geared right towards what I was doing, because looking through the options, I can take all the defaults. Microsoft, the workforce, I just want it for people who are part of that Azure AD tenant. And by tenant, I mean the directory, the domain, the people that belong to that company and all share the same login servers type, conceptual servers. Now it's going to talk about app registrations. Well, I don't know, maybe I'll have to look into that a little bit here in a minute, but we'll just create a new one, right? Single tenant and restrict access. Okay. We want to require authentication and it's a web application. So if they're not authenticated, we just give them a 302, which redirects them and sends them back to Microsoft, which is the Microsoft login page. Cool. Well, why not? Let's kick this off and see what happens. I'm always in favor of a quick, easy win. If this gets me back to my beauty sleep, it's worth it, because I need lots of beauty sleep. All right. And let's pop open an incognito window so it actually, hopefully it works. No, it doesn't. 10 minutes in the talk before something breaks. Let's see. We got authentication, we turn it on, quick start. Return forbidden.
So I know that with app registrations and using the now intra ID, sometimes it takes a couple of minutes at times for something to refresh or something like that, etc. So it could be that, or I'm curious too, have you had the experience where you had to restart that app service?
We don't run into having to restart the app service. There we go. But I definitely have had the experience with caching and just with the Azure Active Directory. And this shows up really bad in B2C, but Azure Active Directory in general, make a change, go to test the change out, doesn't actually show any change, get frustrated, throw the computer out the window. By the time I go fetch my computer, bring it back up, it'll be working. So there are definitely a lot of things that get cached, and definitely patience is useful. Who's got patience?
Especially with the boiler, being open access like that, right?
Well, that and I'm not asleep. You gotta have priorities. sleep or, I mean, so yeah, come in here, we can log in. Let's log in. I'll log in as myself. And you know, that pretty much solves our problem. So at this point, I did go back to sleep. We'll come back to this permission requested because this is kind of an interesting page, part of built into Azure Active Directory and Microsoft on any platform. It can confuse users. That's why I like to use administrative. If I'm administrating something, I'll go ahead and approve this for everybody in the tenant ahead of time. But for the most part, you just click through.
So I noticed too that when you set this up, I didn't notice that opened up the book to learn OAuth and OpenID Connect and right. So you just hit a couple of buttons, some check marks, and said apply.
That's right. You can get really far on security by just doing this. This is OIDC. Now, the way this works, now that I realize I forgot a slide, but the way this works is that there's a module that sits in front of your code. So there's this module that sits in front of it, depending on whether you're Windows or Linux. It's an IIS module in Windows, and then it's a separate process. So it's out of process. And intercept calls that come into your application. They take them, they'll run through the OIDC flow, like the app registration. That's a full app registration that we can go ahead and use later. We can use it for normal IDC stuff. We can use it for any source security we want at that point. It's really there. It's just kind of a way to simplify, kind of a wizard type of thing to get you through it without having to crack the book open and understand everything that's under the hood. Hopefully, if we have enough time, we're going to crack some books open. But it's got this module, and it intercepts the call in, verifies the user is authenticated, and then sends a request in if it is, and it attaches a couple of headers on those requests. So right now, if I come in and maintenance, and we're not gonna probably wait for this, but if I had some logging going on, say I want to know who was actually changing, we can with Easy Auth do this. So we can start getting information about the user because that extra user information is passed in as custom headers. Kind of like if you ever use a load balancer and have an X forwarded for a header where they translate the IP address. Same concept. Just a different use. So if we want to get information right now, if we ran it, I was clicking around there. I could show you, but on App Insights, it would still be no. Still don't have it user information because we don't have any code in place to parse all those headers out. One option is to write code, write some middleware, write some code, parse all those headers out. Not kind of my thing. Instead, let's see if there's a library. So the Microsoft Identity Web library, we add that in there. And then over in program, we can just add app service authentication to, and I'm just going to grab this. So builder services, add razor pages, and then after that, we're going to go ahead and add some authentication. Come on. We're missing it. So this add app service authentication, that's middleware that goes in place, and it'll parse all the headers as they come in. It doesn't need any configuration. So everything's so standard on this Easy Auth, it knows where everything is and whatnot. We also want to use the app, use authentication as part of our middleware as well. Now, if we run this up in our app service, it should have all the information in there to grab the information from the user. And then it participates in the same sort of life cycle that every other middleware that uses authorization authentication does. So we could throw attributes, start doing group checks, start investigating claims on these users, do all that, and it would work wonderfully. And really, it's worth considering. It's, in my experience, this is not actually a particularly popular way based on my experience, but I have a very small sample size. But I've worked with some teams where this would have been perfect, where, you know, it gets you up and running. If I run this locally, I get access to everything. So I don't have to worry about getting users set up and groups set up and having test users and all that other overhead, which is a good thing and bad thing, right? This sort of easy auth, it relies on those extra headers to come in. You don't have that locally. So testing authorization locally isn't going to happen. You're just going to have access to everything. That's a good thing. It's a bad thing. Depends on the team. Depends on what you're doing. But you know, it's kind of that first. I like as the first step, the first cross in the process, saying, "Hey, is this good enough? Is this what's going to get us there the quickest, easiest, and fastest?" And then we can evolve from there. If we get requirements down the road to get really complicated, we can do that. And you can still write policies and everything else. You just have to be in app services in order to test it. And that's rebooting. App services take a while to reboot. So let's say, you know, after a while, I was sitting around, I was talking with the other people at the hotel. And you know, Wendy, she's the main maintenance guy's wife, and he brought his whole family up. You know, we started thinking about, we wanted to add a little more security around this, because just being able to lock people out, that was nice. But you know, we really did want that authorization piece, because you know, we've got a page on here for boiler control. That's great, and that's what Jack mostly messes with. And but then again, we also have like a housekeeping page, and you know, we talked about, we really didn't want Jack doing housekeeping. I saw Jack walking down the hall one day, and I was like, hey, how's it going? Where you going to? I'm going to do some housekeeping. Like, oh, well, that's, now look down, he's carrying an axe. I don't know who uses an axe for housekeeping, but that ain't cool. So maybe we're going to lock him out of the housekeeping page. It seemed weird. I posted on Reddit, but never, whether or not I should call it cows, but never got back to me. So maybe we'll lock that, and you know, maybe reservations. Maybe we can do this page public and let people do a kind of a self-service sign up or whatnot. So to really get this rolling, the next level of complication is to really dive into OIDC and get OIDC working on our local instance. We'll see how much. And the way we can do that, where are we at?
So I've got a question for you right here.
Yeah, go ahead.
On lines 18, on lines 18 and 19, if I remember correctly, and I'm far from perfect on this, the use authorization and the use authentication have to be in that order when you say those use. And you know, anytime there's something that's 50-50 like that, I'm always going to get it wrong, right? So I was curious, and I was like, okay, I don't remember if it's authorization before authentication, because it's actually counterintuitive, if I remember correctly, right? Authentication comes first. Who are you? And then the authorization is, what do you have access to? And now it's saying use authorization in the middleware wiring up, line 18. And then it says, okay, now I'm going to care about who you are, line 19. So it's kind of counterintuitive, but I knew that those had to be wired correctly. So I know what that is. It's, if I remember correctly, it's authorization before authentication, but at runtime, it's authentication that's done first and then the authorization.
You are correct, I think. I think it's authentication first, because that populates the user, and then authorization, which then checks the claims the user has, I think.
Well, I've got time if you have time to to see if this actually is true, because yeah,
Let's do this. Let's get the OIDC stuff on here, because that can run local, and then that'll be easier to test that out. Because you are right that the order is important. So
yeah, cool.
It is funny because every time I say authorization, authentication, as much as I've used these terms, I always have to stop and be like, okay, I think which one's that one's that one, that one's that one.
Yeah.
I don't know why they named them so close together. Well, come on, give me mine. Okay. Yeah, so if we want to drop down into a little bit more level of control, what we're going to do is we're going to take this add app service authentication, take that out. Instead, we're going to replace it with add Microsoft identity web app authentication. Oh, about this name too. I called it Easy Auth, and that's what I see it all over the place on the internet. It's called Easy Auth. The official name is App Service Authentication. So, but yeah, so if we drop this in and we want to provide a default default authentication scheme. And we pop in the Add Microsoft Identity Web API and pass in a configuration file. That is what's going to give us the ability to run this locally, use this locally, and really kind of get into the nitty gritty of what we can do with this. What this does is, instead of relying on the middleware, on the module, the Easy Auth module, to pass those headers in and parse the token, manage those flows, it's going to run the flows in process as part of your application. You do have to throw in some configuration. Now this is the minimum configuration I've found for this particular scenario. You got instance ID, and if you don't know what your instance ID, it is login.microsoftonline.com. If it's something else, you have been beat over the head with it. So things like government clouds or stuff like that would change that. The tenant ID, of course, being your tenant, and then the client ID. Do we want to make a client real quick? You guys want to go through that?
Absolutely.
Okay. Making clients can be counterintuitive. Because creating clients definitely are one of those things where caching matters. You're like, oh, I fat fingered something. Oh, well, I'm just going to go back and change it. Oh, it didn't fix it. So, but there's definitely some terminology and stuff that evolve over time. So if you come down to Active Directory and do an app registration, two places we're going to be looking at really is enterprise applications and app registrations. App registrations are for the apps that you own and you keep to yourself inside your organization. If you want, when you create an app registration, just pop over and show you stuff over in enterprise applications. But really, for the most part, just try one. If you can't find the blade you're looking for, try the other one. So register an application, we need a name. Let's see, hotel management system. You know what? I'm going to call that hotel management system browser, and we'll come back to that. Same question, account solely in this organization. That's going to keep everything inside the tenant. The redirect URL and this platform. The platform is going to determine which OIDC flow you use. Now, when I say flow is the process by which you and the browser and the OIDC server and everybody coordinates and pass information back and forth in order to get a token. Depending on whether you're a public website or spa or an application, a mobile app or something, you're going to have different things. For ASP.NET or Blazor or anything that runs server-side pages, web is the place you go. 70 slash. So sign in OIDC is a route that's magically added to your application when you add Microsoft Identity web app. It's a couple extra controllers get added. That's the default location. You can change it through configuration, but I've never found the need to. So we create that. Now we created it, we want to make a couple changes. So come down to authentication, and we want to check ID token. We're going to come back to that. Check ID token, save. And these are the different options to customize your flows. And then when we go back to overview, this is where we get the information we need for that app settings. So the tenant ID, that AE, and then the client ID, which sometimes gets called application ID. I'm kind of curious if this is going to actually work, because the more people watching, the less chance there is that it works. All right, so we got that. Now, conceivably, if I run this, it should pop up a window and ask me to log in. No, it's not, because I haven't actually required anything to log in. Oh, yeah, I've got one piece that's not technically required, but it's really, really, really good practice. So if you don't have anything marked as requiring authentication, by default, it's going to let anybody in. So what I'd like to do is, I'm not going to type this all out. Add this little chunk of code. So what this is, it's a mess, is you got add authorization services. And then we're going to define a fallback policy. And this is a policy that gets hit whenever no other policies are hit. And what we want to make sure is that there's at least authentication. So if we have that fallback policy, that should force anybody into the site to log, unless it's explicitly marked as a allowance. Is this size okay for you guys, or are you having trouble seeing this? A little small. A little better. Okay. Now, if I go pull up localhost, this might pick up my. Oh, there it goes. Okay, so I pull it up. I'm running locally. That was localhost that I typed in, and it immediately drops me off to Azure to log in. Now this is the same. You notice I'm signed in. That's because I was signed in to Azure Portal. It'd be the same as if I was signed into email or anything else. This is a single sign-on solution, which I don't know if anybody's been on like single sign-on like initiatives from like 10, 15 years ago. It used to be a nightmare, but we get this so cheaply now. And if I sign in, we get that. Oh, I keep forgetting to check off consent for the entire organization. Okay, so now we're in. So I guess that does answer, Sean, your question earlier about which one needs to go first, I think.
Yeah, the add authentication comes first, or the use, and then the use authorization comes next. So they're in the correct order there as well. And I'm glad that you didn't say, consent for entire organization yet, because you might talk on this the next time you see that permission thing is Because it's part of OAuth, which is the authorization side, this is what's saying that because you're logging into this application, this is what is being asked of you, of your information to be provided, right? So it's not, it can be just name, maybe your email address, but it could be, I want access to your OneDrive account or something like that, right? So you know what you're getting into.
Yeah. One of the permissions I like to, or I've used in the past is you can send emails as a user using Microsoft Graph. If you only got like 1 or 2 emails, business application type of things, you're sending 2 emails a day. Using Microsoft Graph to send those out, really easy. But it's going to pop up to the user and say, hey, you really want to get this application with the rights to send out emails on your behalf. Because my application is going to have your name in that from. It's going to be using your credentials to send out those emails. And that's kind of one of the strengths of OIDC versus something like an API key in the header, a custom API key in the header, or some sort of shared secret or a home role JWT type of solution, is that you can delegate permissions. You can set it up so that your front end logs the user in, then you grab that. And if you want to secure your Azure storage on a per document basis, you can say, okay, Sean has access to this, Ryan has access to that, and you actually use your ACLs, your security controls all the way down the stack if you want to. What usually where that plays in the most is if you have a microservice infrastructure and you have one, your front end API wants to call a couple different backend APIs. Instead of having to do like a custom context you pass, just get that delegate token. And that way everybody knows exactly what context, what user they're acting on behalf of, all the way down. Makes logging and auditing and all that stuff so much easier. Makes your security team happy too. Yeah. I have no idea where I was at. Okay. We've been talking a lot about these different terms. Let's go through some slides maybe and kind of define some of these terms and make sure we're all, I'm not losing anybody so far.
I know that you mentioned that Jack was about ready to clean house with the axe.
Yeah, he was a bit of an interesting guy to work with. Definitely a different sort of personality. But you got to deal with that whenever you go to a new job. You always got to find out who's the Jack. Although he was very expressive, so heaven forbid I actually talk to him about anything OIDC. It's just an absolutely amazing terms for so many things. You got OIDC, JWT, SAML, all that stuff. So let's see if we can kind of unpack some of these and talk about. On the very basics, OIDC, I don't think we ever defined that. That's OpenID Connect. It's a standard, it's a protocol standard. And it encapsulates it. It is OAuth. OAuth 2 and then some. So OAuth 2 came out in 2006. OIDC came out in 2014. So these are not new things. They are time tested and battle hardened. And what OpenID Connect did was it added this ID token. That's pretty much all it did. It did some other stuff, but it pretty much added this ID token. And what I mean by token is a token is a JWT, which is a JavaScript web token, which is a JSON object encoded and signed. It contains a lot of information about the user and the environment, a bunch of other stuff. We'll pull one up, hopefully here in a second. So it's a JWT token. OAuth 2 was what defined client scopes, access tokens, and that was where that originally came from. There are a lot of different things that implement OIDC. So you got a lot of choices. I like Azure Active Directory because it's what is usually already in the environment. So use what you got first. But the purple thing is Azure AD B2C, which is a nice thing if you got like public users. You want people publicly signing up and they want to use their Facebook account to log in or their LinkedIn or whatever. There's all sorts of other providers that you do that. And B2C also allows is a really quick way to get like username and password set up as well. It'll handle the database for all that too, and self-service sign up and things like that. Identity server down there, that's now called the One Day. That was kind of a gold standard in .NET environment until they started charging for it. It seems to be dropping off a little bit. Auth0, if I ever go outside the Microsoft ecosystem, Auth0 is my go-to. They were bought by Okta, I think, a couple years ago, but their guys really solid offering there. And there's a good argument to be made to say it's a little more user friendly to the developer than Azure Active Directory but it does have a tighter scope. Azure Active Directory is trying to handle a lot more. It's not just an OIDC provider. So that's where, and Microsoft likes to screw the terms. So if you got any Microsoft guys on the phone. Oh, and actually Azure Active Directory is now Microsoft Intra, I believe. So we got that. If I am going and I want to run a OIDC implementation locally, say want to everybody on my team to be able to run something locally so they can stand up a whole bunch of users and test things out and do different claims. Keycloak's my go-to. You spin that up in a container. It is Java and stuff, but I've never had to mess with the code. It's just you spin it up, it works, it's great. It's enterprise ready. I forget. Is it Red Hat that owns that? Something like that. It's one of the big guys owns it. So there's a lot of different options. Like I said, I usually gravitate towards Active Directory because that's what's already there. Now, that's a whole bunch of history and terms and whatnot, but what is the purpose of OIDC? The whole purpose of OIDC, in my mind, and this is my own definition, so take for what it is that OIDC server needs to issue a token to a client on behalf of a user so that the client can prove to an audience it has access to the scope. So tokens JWT. A client, when you see client ID, when you see application ID, all this stuff, client ID is really important. That's not the user. That's not representing the user. The client is what the user is interacting with. It's the browser. It's your application. It's the phone app. It's your server-side application. It's more of the application. It's not the thing that you're trying to secure, which is where a lot of confusion for me at least came from, is I was trying to create clients for the things I was trying to secure. And it broke down. The naming broke down. I got confused. So the client is trying to prove to an audience. The audience is what you're trying to secure. The audience is actually a claim inside the JWT token. You pop up in token, see the claim, and that audience is going to describe your server, your asset, whatever it is you're trying to secure. And then the scope. Scopes are terrible. Scopes are kind of breaking down that thing you're trying to secure into smaller chunks. A lot of times I do one scope for the whole thing. If you have a large API, you want to break it down into okay, here's the user functions, here's the other functions. What I don't like doing is using scopes for permissions. When you start getting into those things, that's better just to put down into the code, use policies, use roles, use things, information that you get out of your token. So I generally try to keep scopes as simple as possible because they do cause confusion. Yeah, and the next part are flows. So flows, I mentioned it a little bit briefly, are the way that the client, the browser, interacts with Azure AD and your .NET server in order to get this token to the client and let the client hand it back up to the asset that's being secured, hand it back to the audience. Scopes get confusing. Is this too small for anybody? I mean, really. This is the documentation on different ways and different types of applications and what scope or what flows you would use on this. And you dig into that and it's just like, no, let's forget about that. There's two important flows. One's going to be an implicit flow and the other's going to be a code flow. Sometimes code flow with PKCE. Generally, everything's going to end up with code flow with PKCE. So if you get options, code flow with PKCE is kind of the default. Right now, the way that Microsoft Identity is set up, it is using implicit flow. The bottom line of that is that there's one less network hop. So on a code flow, you'll do this back and forth and hand off passwords and stuff, and the server will hand the browser back a random string. That random string can then be handed back to the identity or to the Azure AD, and you can redeem a token. So that's the difference. Where with a implicit flow, you get that ID token back at the same time that you actually authenticate. That was the extra checkbox about bottom of the client registration that we checked. That's what enabled implicit flow. So, terms-wise, how we doing? Oh, this is why virtual is a little harder.
Yeah, as Chris puts, clear as mud. Yeah, so a lot of times when this is like the first exposure to a lot of those things, like you mentioned PKCE and like some people will try to say Pixie and things like that. And I know, right? Just to help remember some of those acronyms and terms and et cetera like that. So this is one of those where I'm glad that there is, as you kind of put it, that the easy button, the easy auth, because you can get to a working hello world super quickly. I mean, compared to 10 years ago, right? We can get to it so much easier these days. And then we can dig in as developers, then we can dig in and go, okay, what does this really mean? How does this really work? So yeah, there's a lot of exposure going on, and that's okay, right? And some of this is going to be new to some people, and like, and for me as well. I didn't know about the fallback policy you can add on, and that's fantastic, right? To provide that if nothing else is declared, I want to require authentication first, and that's fantastic. So, and I love too that, as you're pointing out, with as you chose Microsoft, Azure AD, which is now Intra ID, is as your your ID provider. I know it's a weird name. Intra is the umbrella name of all the security tools. Intra ID is what Azure Active Directory is now, because
it's gonna take a while to get used to.
Yes, I know, right? Well, and Azure Active Directory was a terrible name to begin with because it was never active. And so it's actually going to a better.
I my customers to understand it though.
Right. Yeah, I get it. Yeah. So, but as you were pointing out, that you would log in with Microsoft, and which means your app and our apps, when we do this, we don't get the users, username and passwords. Microsoft has that, or right, whoever else that we use as that provider, that EID provider, such as Auth0 and or Google, or Twitter and things like that. So or Facebook, right? They could be set up, and if you authenticate with them and they give me the token, well, then you're good.
Yeah.
And
you don't have to worry about your credential database getting hacked or something getting leaked, or even putting security controls around a credential databases. That's kind of a nightmare.
Yeah.
You just let somebody else deal with it. It's like if you ever use credit card companies, Square or all the other. Let somebody else deal with credit cards. Let somebody else deal with credentials. Let me take care of the business problems I'm trying to solve.
Yep, totally agree. It's another wheel to not reinvent.
Yeah. That, and so you get into the nitty gritty of it, there's a ton of ways to kind of let it go sideways. I worked on a system where the guy decided to do his own JWT implementation. And he put the user's role, and he's basing security controls off this. He put the base user's role inside the JWT, which is perfectly standard, perfectly fine. But he never signed it. So you could go into his application, that JWT would show up in your cookies or wherever he's storing it. Open it up, give myself administrator, plop it in, and now I'm administrator. It's just that, and it's so easy just to miss something, to forget about something, and leave gaping holes in the security. Let's see. Oh, you know what we can do? If we get time. I do kind of like looking at the actual flows. If I can do this. This is not the check-in I was looking. I need to open up an incognito window. This will work. Okay. So I never really quite understood flows until I saw the actual back and forth going on. And this is kind of where it really drives down the point that the application's not the one that's responsible for the credentials. It's not responsible for passwords, not responsible for hardly anything besides just reading it and verifying it. And that is one of the nice things about using this Microsoft Identity Web API is in a JWT inflow, if everything's correct. And there's, instead of add Microsoft Identity Web API, since it's the client that needs to be registered if you're doing a spot, your API could just use the regular JWT verification. It's the client that needs, or it's the JavaScript client that needs to be registered as a client. So you could do a JWT implementation or a verification, but you got to make sure you verify the issuer. You got to make sure you verify the audience. You got to make sure you verify the issue that, not before the. Now I'm going to forget all the claims that you have to go through. With the Add Microsoft Identity Web API, it does require you to be a little more restriction over on the Azure side or the Intro side or wherever. But you don't have to worry about all that. It has the right defaults for you, which I'm all about that. All right, let's hit this. Let's see if I got my network tracing set up properly. How did that log? I'm in on incognito.
Do you have multiple windows that are in incognito?
Oh, yeah, I do. That's
sure.
Heaven forbid I have too many windows open.
I know that has bit me in the tail before. That's why I mentioned it first thing.
Which actually is kind of an interest of flow, but I wanted to get that first initial flow, which would probably be now. This is all HTTPS. It does, when you register your return URL, it does let you do localhost on straight HTTP, but everywhere else it forces you into HTTPS, which you don't want to be passing tokens around where they can be intercepted. Okay, cool. So we got that going, and if I pop open to, okay. Let's try this. So the first part of this flow, so the implicit flow, is we requested localhost 7170, which is the main page. We requested no arguments there. And our response coming back was just 302. The server side said, hey, I don't see any headers. I don't see anything proving who you are. So why don't you go talk to my friend over here at login@microsoftonline.com. Go talk to him and come speak to me once you're done. And that's where we get redirected over to, now we do come in with query string parameters. Here's our client ID. That's how we let Microsoft know where we're coming from. That's kind of important. And this redirect URL, that's how we let Microsoft where to send That's how Microsoft knows where to send us back to when we're all done authenticating. That does have to be registered up on that client registration screen. If you don't, it's going to pop up a message saying it's not registered, and you just copy and paste it and be on your way. A lot of this other stuff is OIDC stuff. It does pass some state up, but we're not in that sort of nitty gritty. So it's going to do this, and then we're going to log in. And I'm going to log in as Wendy because there's a non-zero chance that we end up looking at the post from this password screen. Oh yeah, and here's the that permission screen that you're talking. So it's viewing your basic profile. That was the graph.profile API permission, and then maintain access to the profile you've given it. That's going to be, I think, on all of them. And if you had extra, like you had you had your own custom APIs, or you want to send emails or any of that, it would just be listed out. Very important for public applications. Internal applications, like I said, I just approve them for my users because I think I have that authority. Okay, so let's see what happened on that flow. So we did the login side of things. I need this column to be wider. Where's my column? All right, get credentials. There we go. Okay, so there was the consent. The post login was where we actually sent the. Now, after the consent set, what I kind of find interesting is the response. We did the last step in login, and the response comes back, and it's this little form that made me scratch my head because, you know, in Chrome, you don't actually get to see the body once you pass on that. That's why I'm using this goofy thing. But the form comes back, and it's got a return URL right there. Interesting. It's got our ID token. Cool. That's what we're looking for. It's got some other stuff. And then down here, it automatically submits itself. So instead of giving you a 302 or something like that, this is how Microsoft gets information from its server through your browser to the server you're trying to hit. And that's why you don't have to have line of sight between your ASP.NET server and Microsoft's login. The client, the browser that your users are using, they need to have network connections to both of those. But if they're on like a VPN and you're split tunneling or something like that, or somehow they're inside you deployed your application inside a private network, you don't have to expose your server. This kind of form, like silent submit, that's how that works, which I thought was really kind of interesting.
Well, and the fact that Microsoft cannot send a local host and get to you.
Right.
Right. Because that's relative, right? So, it's giving your code going it to redirect to local host. And since that matches what you did on the app registration, that redirect URL, that's helping that redirect process and match up. And so it's relative to the server that is doing the redirect.
Yeah. I completely forgot about that because localhost, that's where you develop, that's where I'm running on everything, and that's different everywhere.
Right.
So when it does post it back, it has this ID token in it. Where's my request? And when I'm not getting the right authorization stuff going on, I like to grab this ID token. Copy that. And we're going to go over to jwt.io. There's other sites that do this. It's just the one I've always used. Supposedly it never leaves your browser, but yeah. Now you paste it in here, and you can see the content of what's actually in this ID token, what the actual data is that's in here. your name, your email address, preferred username, things like that. You can see everything that's in there. And this is all, so everything that's purple is base64 encoded. You base64 decode that, you get all this, and then the blue down here is the signature part of that. So that's how you make sure that somebody doesn't, intercept it as they're taking that form post, intercepted, give themselves admin and then repost it up to the server. That's how you can trust this. So I've definitely popped this open to see, there's your audience. So the audience right there, that's the client ID. Right? Yeah. Issuer, that's, all these other things. That's the expiration day in Unix or whatever dates. So yeah, definitely very useful, especially when I get into things like roles and be like, okay, I need to register a role and I need to make sure it shows up in JSG so I can verify it in the application. So, we never talked about, we got totally sidetracked. Last thing I talked about was Jack running down the hall with an axe. Like, it's nothing. Although, around here, not that rare. Let's see. So if we come up to housekeeping, we are kind of running a little. Am I really an hour into this already? Yeah. We'll do.
You're doing great. You're doing great. Keep going.
Authorization.
I want to see how Jack does.
So authorization on this, authorized. If I just leave it like that, it's going to make sure that you have somebody who's authorized. Somebody has a JWT token. Someone has a token. I can put in a roles equals. What I'd really like to do is just put like housekeeping. But what I kind of need to do is get the GUID for the housekeeping group. And what this is going to do is it's going to check the group that the I'm going to say Azure Active Directory user belongs to. Which is, I like using that as a way for businesses and whatnot, because it's already built in. You can do app specific roles and you can do a whole bunch of those. But the simplest I come across is just using roles. And then in Azure, we're going to pop over to our client. Oh, come on. Apparently it's confused because I'm signing in too often. We're going to pop over to our client and tell it that we do actually need the roles. Keep wanting to click on app roles. If you click on app roles, you can create an app role here. This is a role that exists solely for this application. It's not part of Active Directory. It's not something you would assign through the normal group membership. But it's nice if it's like an application you want to share across the main tenants, or you want to do something like that. You do end up assigning users to app roles, but these app roles are specifically for your application. What I really want is come down to Azure Active Directory, go over to Enterprise Applications, I think. Because when I can't find my blade, it's usually because it's over on Enterprise Applications. And if I come over here, okay. And it should have it's just one blade. I can picture it in my head.
So there was another section for roles if you're looking for RBAC related. Okay, that's an app registration back where you were, and then go 2 items down. So you've got Yeah, app registrations, click on your app. And then
Oh,
you've got roles and administrators. If I'm not
Cool.
mistaken, that's
roles administrators are interesting. I've never used them. I have no idea what's on that blade. The one that I was looking for was token configuration.
there you go.
I just blanked on that. So what we want to do is we want to add a group claim. So the claims are all those data points inside your JWT. So we can check off security groups, and on we want to admit the group as a role claim. So the name of the claim is going to be role, because when we do that, it just matches up with that. So it just kind of just works. Just works. I don't know, let's check them all off. We're not doing any SAM1, we're not using the access token, we're just using the ID token right now. With that there, if we were to go through there and kind of intercept that ID token, we should see a new claim on there that says roles. In our case, we wanted the ID for the group of housekeeping, I think. Here we go, which is just the object ID right there. And if we do that, pop that in there, in theory, if I logged in as Jack, it would just give me an access denied right there. If I tried to get to the housekeeping. Now, if you're using controllers, same attributes, same syntax, same process. Whether it's just like a REST API or if it's MVC. Blazor is similar. Blazor's a little different, but I like Blazor though. So I think I don't remember who I'm logged in as. I had another branch that actually had the, there we go. So it popped up in access denied. There is a package out there called Microsoft Identity.web.ui, which provides some basic defaults for access denied pages and gives you some controllers for automatically sign in, sign out, or sign in and sign out, and some other things without having to write much code. That's kind of a good thing to pull in this case though. I didn't bother. I just, this route right there, account access denied, just throw a page out there on that same thing. It's a default route. You can override it in the configuration if you want to. If you want to override what's in the Microsoft UI, you want to make sure it's inside the Microsoft Identity area. So you have to nest that under an area. But you can override any of the default UI pages that way too. So yeah, we got that. And the other big one is like, at least that way we can keep Jack from doing whatever he's doing in those hotel rooms. He ain't right. He might need a vacation or something. And then we had like a reservation page. If we want people to self-service reservation, we can just throw up here like allow anonymous. That's all you got to do there. So that would work with, so anybody without JWT can come in and see that page. What I find fascinating is we're dealing with some complicated concepts, right? I know we went through a ton of terms, a lot of stuff. If we look at what code we've actually changed though, we threw some configuration in, and we threw a couple lines into our program. And frankly, that's optional. That's best practice, but that's optional. So, I mean, we got a lot of mileage for very little code. These are kind of those lines of code that you might take a whole day to write just a handful of lines to get everything just right. But it's really a powerful framework. It's really a powerful way to secure things and get that single sign-on experience to kind of embed use all the resources from within your organization and get this in a state where Microsoft's going to be updating this, Microsoft's going to be maintaining this. The less code I have to maintain, the better. So put all that work on someone else. I don't have to worry about keeping a database of usernames and passwords and all this other stuff. We still have a ton of flexibility with these policy builders. I mean, you can do a assertion. So, I mean, you can do a policy where it's like, is it between 6 o'clock in the morning and 5 o'clock in the afternoon? Oh, I want Jack messing with a boiler. You know, and he's got a little, I see him down at the bar, you know. So, you know, you can do all sorts of policies. And there's so much depth here. But there's so much that you get for so little. I love it. So I think I'm probably going to wrap it up there. Yeah, I got a couple slides on. That's just the flow. And I did, yeah. So yeah, let's just kind of wrap it up there. Questions, thoughts, condolences.
Yeah, poor Jack. If anybody has any questions, you're more than welcome to come off mute or in chat, and I'll ask on your behalf. I thought this was awesome. I already saw a couple of comments there going. I was doing, you know, getting roles by using a graph call, and now it's like, boom, this is just so much easier, and right, and just by adding a little. So it's already going to make, you know, that implementation is a whole lot easier. So this is definitely helping a lot. This is, like I said, I've also learned quite a bit as well. So this has been exciting. So, all right. Does anybody got any questions? We'll give it a go twice.
Apologize, I did not have the meeting chat up. I was just going.
No worries. I was watching it as well. So no worries there.
I would like to ask if there is a good documentation place to look at that is current. I had a terrible time. This is a couple of years ago, but it seemed like everything I looked at was from way back in the past, or was what was going to be coming in the future. And I had a terrible time telling what I could do at that moment in time to be, you know, up to date. And so I may have messed up myself by not knowing some of the defaults and things that we just saw Ryan use, or maybe they're newer. I don't know, but I didn't feel like I was getting the then current state-of-the-art picture.
Yeah. So for a lot of it, I will go to that URL right there. It is up to date for almost everything except for this kind of transition from implicit flow to code flow with PKC. This is really good documentation. I think this is great, and it's accurate, and it's thorough, and it gives all sorts of different scenarios. And that's kind of the challenge with OIDC, is it serves so many different scenarios. It's like, what are you using it for? That's going to be your perspective, and that's going to color everything you read. So I do like how they break it down that way and try to start with, you know, quick starts and easy intros. Like I said, the transition between the two flows, you'll come across things saying, don't use implicit flow. Implicit flow has a security flaw when cross-browser cookies are deprecated here in the next 2 years or something like that. It's going to be a couple of years out, but once they become deprecated, implicit flow won't work anymore. It's something we know in the industry. They have not updated all their documentation, all their UIs, all their stuff to reflect and to start using code flow with PKC. So my real suggestion on that, which is one that I have such a hard time with, is yes, you will read that, hey, don't use implicit flow. If you're using a Razor application, an MVC application, something that's server side, go ahead and use it. It's what all the defaults are going to show you, what all the examples are going to show you. Don't try to force code flow into that. You will, I I drive myself nuts every time I come across it. They will update that library well before it becomes an issue. But it's kind of a heads up, hey, in a year or two, you're gonna have to come back to it and do an update. Probably be as simple as just do a NuGet update. But I'll throw that out there. Besides that one issue, I think this particular site does a really good job.
Yeah, that's awesome too. And I think understanding the flow options, if I remember correctly, the code flow is when you have, you've got the server-side code, your access token could be stored on the server, versus implicit flow is when you've got like a JavaScript only client, as in there isn't really a .NET backend kind of thing, and it cannot have either the access code or I'm sorry, there is no access code versus access token, because it can be sniffed and altered so quickly.
I think that's so. Code flow is usually what you're going to use for SPAs, or it's what you're going to use for SPAs, because especially with PKCE or Pixie, I'm going to try to start using Pixie. With Pixie, you don't have to use a secret to identify what the client is.
Yeah.
So it's got this extra handshake, this extra back and forth with nonsense and signing and stuff. Cryptography. It's awesome. That way you don't have to worry about having a secret that the JavaScript has, because you can't have a secret on the client's browser.
Right.
So that's a problem. It solved it. And the whole reason that everybody's starting to go that way is because, well, it works on JavaScript, but it works just as well on everything else. So why not kind of just use that for everything? But yeah, the implicit is where it assumes that you're coming from a trusted server. So you can have that information flow through it and not have to worry about someone sniffing it.
Awesome. All right. Last chance. Any other questions before we stop the recording?
Oh, this was recorded?
That's right. I got proof.
Oh.
All right. I'll go ahead and take back over and stop the recording. Thank you, Ryan, very much. I greatly appreciate it.
My
And
pleasure.
yeah, like I said, I learned a lot. There was quite a bit to this, and this is exciting. I heard some of the comments on here that there was so much more gained as well on this. So a great job.